So a slightly different format to everybody beforehand. I don't have any slides, and I'm not going to teach you about marketing. Instead, I'm going to do my favorite thing, which is talk about me for 40 minutes. So awesome. I have a captive audience. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, and I think really my job is to add an entrepreneurial stance to today. My story starts pre-digital and then went post-digital, so I'll divide it up that way. But to give you a flavor of how I started, when I was 4, my father started taking me to school every day. And one of the things we did on the way to school was, after we did the times table, some maths problems, what's the capital city, how many red cars did you see? My father, who didn't have a great deal of cash, had invested about a couple of £100 in some of the utilities that privatized on the London Stock Exchange in the 80s. So the thing that we did every day on the way to school is I read him his share prices from the Financial Times. So for those of you that can picture the Financial Times, for most of us now, we open the pages and it's no problem to turn them. But if you can picture a 4-year-old in the back seat of a car on a seatbelt trying to open these enormous pages of a newspaper and read share prices, it was something of a struggle. And it's one of my earliest memories. So from the age of 4 to 18, my father took me to school every single day. And without fail, I looked at these 4 or 5 share prices every single morning. That really set me up, as far as I'm concerned, for the rest of my life, and I hold all of that accountable for all of the things I did next. My career really started when I was 18 at university. I got there, I'd been working at McDonald's for 2 years. I got to university, changed to working in a bar for an extra 20p an hour, and I thought to myself, I simply cannot afford to buy a Topshop top or do any of the things that my friends that had a bit more cash could do. How was I going to make a little bit more money? I was wandering around the university. It was the first week, Freshers' Week, where you go to the Tequila Society and everything else that poisons you for the first week, and then you find out a few intelligent things. And I saw this sign in these leaflets for student loans, which, when I got to college, were only just starting. So I went in, I got the form for my student loan, and it told me that I could take £1,500 out as a student loan on practically no interest, so long as I was spending it on my university education. So, don't tell, but I obviously filled in that I needed books and I needed help with my tuition, and I took out £1,500, and about 10 days later, it arrived in my bank account, which was my first taste of a hit of cash. And it seemed to me to be a very practical thing to do, to buy some stock market shares and trade. Now, at this point, I'd never traded. I'd also like to remind everybody, even though I'm clearly older than I look, that at this point, you had to buy stocks and shares by telephone banking. There were no online resources, none of the digital tools that all of us are very familiar with today. So I decided to take my £1,500. I also found out that my bank account that my parents had kept for me, where birthday money from my grandma and the odd special occasion was put in, was entirely and utterly accessible to me with my passport because I was 18. So I've topped up my £1,500, emptied the bank account my parents had set up for me, which had another sort of £1,000 in it. They never knew this until a few years later, and started trading. How did I start trading? Another thing about me, I am vegan. The reason I'm vegan is I am allergic to milk and eggs and have been for most of my life. So I'm an excellent person to know if you want to have a dairy-free lunch anywhere you could possibly need to go, because that's where I need to eat too. So when I was at university, one of the places that we used to eat as a sort of huge treat, if we were thinking of being very lavish and taking ourselves out for dinner, was Pizza Express. Cost us about £10, and we could have a pizza, I could have no cheese, a salad, the dressing had no cream in it, and a Diet Coke for about £10, and that was, it was pretty big time when we started at university. And whenever I traveled around the United Kingdom to see my friends who were also at university, that's where we would eat, because of course my friends are very thoughtful and let me choose where we go so that I don't have anaphylactic shock every time we go out. So I would travel around the country, and I would always go to Pizza Express, and I would always notice I had a great experience. I got the same quality of food. If anything was wrong, it would always be replaced and taken off the bill. And so it occurred to me, I'm going to buy some Pizza Express stock. That was the first stock that I ever traded. Over the course of the year, I made fairly significant returns, and it got to about 9 months into my university first year, and it occurred to me that I did not want to work in the bar or McDonald's, much as I loved McDonald's, for my next summer, because they weren't going to pay me enough. So how else could I top up the money that I'd made from trading my student loans for a summer holiday that my friends were taking across South America, which at that point I couldn't really afford? So I wrote to 10 investment banks, How did I know to do this? Well, the one thing I did at university every day, other than, in theory, go to university, but I wasn't terribly good at attending, was I would buy Financial Times every day, because that's what I was used to doing. That's what I read the paper every day. So my friends would wake up and valiantly go to university at 9 o'clock in the morning to their classes. I would inevitably probably still be in bed and was not the best at getting up, but I would always meet my friends for lunch, and by then I would have read the Financial Times. So I knew who all the banks were. So at this point, I send my CV and a cover letter with my summary trading sheet of my first 6 months of trading to the HR director at all of these investment banks that I found the address of in the yellow pages. And I was ultimately offered 10 jobs from all 10 of those people that I wrote to for the summer. I took 2 of those 10 because I couldn't bear to take one. They were offering me £300 a week. It was the most money I'd ever heard of, and it just seemed absolutely unfathomable to turn anyone down. So I spent the first 6 weeks of my summer holiday, my first university summer holiday, working for one bank, went to South America with the money that I'd made in the middle, and then I worked for a second one. What did I do when I was at these investment banks where I clearly needed to impress them so that if I wanted to have a job when I left university, I was in with a chance? Of course, it's quite tricky when a bunch of interns turn up in your business. You've probably got a job to do. You don't necessarily have anything you can give them. So at both of these investment banks, I was given a wonderful tour of the office, introduced to lots of interesting people, stockbrokers, and I was told my one job for the summer, the thing that I would be effectively graded on, would be I needed to write a broker note about a stock. I had spent an entire year trading a few stocks, but I had been principally tracking Pizza Express, which at that time, believe it or not, had a reasonably turbulent share price. So for both of these jobs, I wrote a share note that was arguably better than the one that anybody had written for any city broker firm, because I had spent the entire year studying it and making money off of it on Pizza Express. And that is what led me to get, very early on, my first offers of jobs in the city for when I left university. So I carried on at university, I studied languages, and when it came to time for leaving, I obviously had some seed in me that had been nurtured from the age of 4 for finance. It was inevitable and what I wanted to do to go into finance. So I went into investment banking at 21, and I had a fantastic time. I learned a great deal. It gave me the stamina of sort of a workhorse unlike any other. I worked very long hours, I worked with incredible people, and I learned a lot of skills. But it occurred to me that this was not what I wanted to do for life. I really wanted to build and create something. All of the companies that I ever traded stock in were all companies founded by entrepreneurs that I'd taken the time to read about, and sometimes I had the opportunity to get to know. And I really wanted to do the same thing. So at just over 27, I left the city with a plan. And that plan was, I was desperate to buy a bunch of businesses that I could put together and put on the stock exchange. A few small issues. I didn't necessarily have enough money to do this. I didn't know how to float a company, and I wasn't really sure how any of this was going to happen. But I left my job, which was a very scary prospect. I knew it was the right thing to do. And I started hunting for small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses that had really good returns, that were robust businesses, but didn't have somebody like me in them, whatever that means. To me, that meant someone that was very financially literate, someone that was capable of communicating with the city, and somebody that was very ambitious. And I started talking to accounting firms and businesses, and I found a collection of businesses who were willing to back me and essentially put their business in with me and take shares instead of cash in return. So that is how, at 29, I came to be the youngest person to float a company. I will add, I had absolutely no idea at the time that, number one, I was the youngest person to do so, and believe it or not, I know that the stock market to most people seems very ivory tower. I can only tell you that it seemed like the normal thing to do. I needed to do something. I've been trading stocks and shares and reading about them since the age of 4, so to me, the obvious way to solve my problem was to float a company. And to this day, or until recently, when I was starting businesses and I needed a bit of extra cash, the way I always did that was I always traded. So that was pre-digital age. That was when I had to phone up Barclays and wait 10 days to make a settlement on my sort of financial transactions, and that is how, I effectively got started. The second part of my life has been building businesses. So to walk you through some of the things I've done and the way that the digital age has effectively touched the businesses that I've started. My first and second businesses were both related to parking. I know that that probably makes everybody now want to get their iPhone out and start browsing the internet to read about something else. It doesn't sound terribly exciting, But I was always brought up to believe that a phrase, where there's muck, there's brass. So something doesn't need to be terribly glamorous. Whatever it is you're doing, it doesn't really matter. You're selling a business or a product or a solution. So I built my first parking business. I did a lot of research on the internet. I acquired my first parking business. It was a very small business. It was based out of London. It was very quiet with these very solid returns, but never spoke to anybody. Pretty much didn't have a website, never ever went out to pitch for business, waited for it to land in its lap. So we immediately changed that. So I started building a parking business and reaching out to people in the way that I know how. I used LinkedIn. I used email. I used to hunt for people's email addresses that were CEOs of businesses. I would go and visit car parks. I would find out who owned them, and then I would write a note to the people that did, and I would explain to them why we would do something better. This was at the beginning of LinkedIn, essentially. There's now 380 million people I could reach out to on LinkedIn, but I had to be a little bit more entrepreneurial at the start. So in many ways, the business doesn't sound terribly digital, but we were the first people to introduce an online resource for parking, which you're starting to see all over the world now. If you have a house by train station, if your church has a driveway, if your office block has a couple of spare spaces and you're wondering, I bet somebody would like to park here and would like to pay me, but you can't have a parking meter, there are plenty of online international resources now where you can list your space. Someone can type in a postcode or a zip code, can find that space and can take it from you, and we were one of the first to do that. We were also one of the first to recognize that when you park your car, traditional parking meters or pay and display can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes you're going to a restaurant or a shop or a shopping center or a conference, and you simply don't know how long you're going to be in advance. So we were one of the first companies in the UK to implement something called automatic number plate recognition technology. I will not bore anyone with the intricacies of that, but essentially it's probably what some of you are used to now for some of the shopping centers you go into, where you drive in, the camera picks up your license plate, and when you go to leave, you type in your license plate to the machine and you pay for the amount of time you stayed. So technology's always been at the heart of my businesses ever since we started them. And now I'm on to Enterprise Jungle, which is HR tech, technology, and people. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to sort of talk about and I wanted to touch on. And what I really wanted to do today, having seen this morning lots of people using iPhones and lots of people obviously looking at the internet, which is very important on Ireland's Internet Day, but what I really wanted to do was to get people thinking in this room, is I know that broadband in some parts of Ireland is a little bit challenging, and I was a little bit aghast to understand that that's not going to be resolved completely and in its entirety until 2023. But nonetheless, there were a few figures, a few stats that have been presented to me that really made me think, and I think touch everybody in this room that either has a business in Ireland, is doing business in Ireland, or is a consumer. The Irish share of the digital marketplace is worth €9 billion, and that sounds fantastic, and it sounds pretty punchy, and it sounds like Ireland's doing fantastic. But the figure that really made me balk was that Irish consumers are estimated to be spending $490 billion across Europe this year, which means that everybody in Ireland is essentially shopping overseas. So what I wanted to do initially, and then I had a few more points to make a little bit later, was to ask for a few questions, especially from some of the SMEs or business people in the room who are thinking about expanding their business. I don't understand how anybody can have a business in this day and age and not have some sort of digital presence. The other thing I can't understand is people who essentially feel like they don't have the resources to hand to do what they need to do. There are 380 million people on LinkedIn. Twitter is a platform which practically guarantees you a response to any question you might have from anybody in the world. And it was really interesting to see who tweeted me to ask me questions before I came here today. So really, we have information at our digital fingertips. So I wanted to open the room to a few questions. I wanted to open the room to any questions you might have about my entrepreneurial journey. And most of all, I hope that everybody in the room that has a business here today is thinking about how they can do more to keep money in Ireland. Because whilst as a British and American business, I'd be delighted if you spent your pennies with me, I think it's really important to support the economy. So think local, but act global. So thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome some questions. And if nobody asks me a question, I'm going to come and hunt you down afterwards. So I'm expecting questions and putting my glasses on so I can see who's concentrating.
Yeah, sorry, Niall from Halo here. I was just curious, I know you've obviously had a huge personal success and your own entrepreneurial journey. I was just curious about the kind of people that you hire into your organization and the culture that you try to build within, because obviously you've had a huge success, but it wouldn't have all been on your own. So just about the culture that you've built in your own organization.
It's a great question. I'm obviously devastated you don't think that I did it all on my own. and that I have to give credit to other people. You're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that has been the biggest challenge has been learning to find the right people as opposed to finding the right people. It was a real learning journey in my first business because we would hire people who on paper seemed to fit. And I spent a lot of my time on human resource issues and not my business very early on. One of the things I've come to feel both about hiring and also, in fact, about most business decisions and, in fact, life decisions that I take is to go with my gut and to trust my instinct. These days, we have my software business builds complicated products on a very new cloud platform. So we need people with very explicit skills. Those people we have to hire based on, experience and track record and obviously training. But for everybody else, typically, I know within about 10 seconds of talking to somebody in an interview if I'd like to hire them. Probably about 5 years ago, I started hiring based on conversation and personality as much as on CV. And it would often be the case that I always encouraged them to put people in front of me that they thought were great people, but whose CVs didn't really necessarily fit the job. And also, I always pick a few from a pile that everybody's tossed away just to have a little look. I always have a flick myself. One of the most important things about business, as we all know, is sales. And I commend the lady in the middle there who stood up and introduced her business very loudly and to all of us, because that's exactly what you have to do as an entrepreneur. You have to sell. I mean, you're the person that I remember from the room that asked a question. And that's the most important thing, really, for you today, is who here could you do business with? And so one of the things that I always do when I employ is I have a chat with people, because really everybody that's working in my business is representing us, and everybody needs to be thinking laterally. So we take people who don't have prerequisite skills, but have the capacity, A, to learn, and B, have interesting personality. I very rarely ask work questions in an interview. So when people have got to an interview, by the time people have got to an interview with me, they've sometimes been through the tech team or something very specific. But generally speaking, I want to know that people will fit in with our team, will help build a culture, are quite goal-orientated, that we could sit around the table and have lunch and enjoy it. Occasionally that gets a bit tricky because we've got some really interesting, amazing and very talented engineers who come from countries where English isn't their first language and where they probably don't know what the hell to do when they arrive in our office culture where we kind of whoop and cheer. But I think personality is very important. The other thing I think is that technology is obviously at the heart of a lot of businesses that we're talking about. I'm not a technologist. I mean, I've subsequently learned to code. And I've got skills now that I didn't have 5 years ago or 3 years ago or 10 years ago. And I think that finding a good partner or finding people that match those skills you don't have is critical. I really try and employ people that are smarter than me and know things that I don't. And that has always been transformative in my businesses and no doubt for yours as well. Thank you for your question.
Hi, Emma. Fascinating story. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Do introduce yourself, by the way, as well.
Yes, my name is Petja. I work with Keypack. It's a meat processing and manufacturing company of Ireland. I have a very specific question, just off the top of your head, in the retail sector, food industry. Can you think of an in-shop experience that matches a product with a digital experience that you can think of, or you've come a good example of creating a digital experience in-store for a specific food product?
Food product, did you say?
Food product, or any retail.
Food
really.
Or food?
Food.
Food, forgive me. Sorry.
Could be in retail overall, if you think of an example or an idea.
Yeah, I mean, there are apps when you go into businesses, such as some of the organic stores in London where you can type in sort of interests or allergies or something that you have that then suggests brands. I mean, digital experience in retailers that I know are generally retail with clothing. So you have companies like Dressipy that are helping people to better understand what clothes to pick, to reduce returns, that sort of thing. I don't know any about food, to be honest with you. But of course, I mean, most of us, I don't know about you, but most of my circle that are entrepreneurial, we do most of our shopping, manage most of our life by apps. So I, for example, order all of my food online. And there is a degree of machine learning and AI in all of my apps that I order my food from, so Ocado or whoever else it is, which makes intelligent suggestions about food items that I might like. So Ocado know that I typically order dairy-free or vegan, or I don't order meat or whatever else it is. But I think machine learning and artificial intelligence, which I look at very carefully, I haven't come across anything that makes suggestions, but it would have to be very, very unique and very insightful to be able to do that. If you do want to tweet me, I can think of a couple that do that in other areas of retail, and I'll happily make those suggestions to you. I'm thrilled to know that I've answered everybody's questions and told you everything that you need to know. Hi.
Hi, my name's Tom from TD Fitness. My company does corporate wellness on site, so anyone can hit me up after this if you want. What do you feel is next? What drives you? Because you floated your company in the stock market. Seems like you're very successful. Did you hit a plateau ever, or are you just so driven you want to keep on going?
A few things. I mean, it would be fair to say that I am an exceptionally driven person, but I've also learned over the course of business and over life, and you mentioned well-being, that you cannot build an empire without your health. So I'm extremely interested in health and preventative health, and I think it's an exceptionally important part of building a business to understand how to switch off and take time out. I mean, the nomophobia that was referred to this morning, of which I am, of course, guilty, probably like everybody else in this room, is something to be a little bit afraid of. We spend most of our time with Wi-Fi waves and radio waves sitting right next to us and by our heads. In terms of personal, in terms of my journey, of course, success is an incredibly subjective thing. There are a number of things that I find very exciting about the world, but there are a number of things that I find worrying about the world. And one of the wonderful things about having a voice, whether that be through UNICEF, through writing newspaper articles, through whatever else it is, or through having platforms and being able to speak to people, is being able to do things about things that you're not necessarily at peace with. So for me, I look forward to the business continuing to grow, mainly because with voice and also with a healthy P&L comes an ability to invest in things that you think make change. You know, there are a number of things. One of the reasons for my veganism is I'm concerned about climate change. I look forward to the day that I'm going to be able to give a large sum of money to charities or to organizations, for example, that I think are doing things that are very important to make us all more conscious, more aware, and to save the planet. So I think for me, business has actually become a lot more, business is not really a day job for me. I'd say I sort of live and breathe entrepreneurship. Most of the businesses that I support, most of the companies that I buy from, most of the apps on my phone, and a lot of the things that I do are tied in to that. And in many ways, I think my ethos and the things that I live by are really driven by the fact that I've been building businesses now for 12 years. But yeah, health is at the heart of that. So what a brilliant business to be in. Hi, you come ready with a mic, so you must be important.
Not at all, not at all. Emma, you heard me say earlier how in Ireland we're concerned that SMEs are at such a less developed stage in terms of e-commerce. We look across to the UK, and clearly UK small businesses, they really are much farther ahead than we are. Is there anything you can point to on their journey, something you might even call a tipping point, that moved UK companies from being Luddites to more embracing the e-commerce potential from websites and digital transformation generally?
Well, I come from a bubble of entrepreneurship in many ways. So the people that I know that are setting up businesses and the people that always were setting up businesses were always looking for opportunities. And those opportunities, as everybody who's spoken this morning, need to be frictionless. One of the things that I noted from the list of bullet points that I read in the very helpful report is that only 25% of businesses that are online in Ireland have some sort of sales or some sort of portal that allows you to transact with a customer. So you advertise that you sell something, but people can't buy that. And I think that the thing that's most important, I can't think of one particular tipping point, but what I do know is this. There are so many online free resources that can either help you build a website, you can tie up to PayPal. There are so many different ways to allow people to check out of your products. I'm a massive believer, for those people that were talking earlier about building websites and building businesses, I'm a very big believer of going to the market before you're ready. If you're waiting for your website to look perfect, if you're waiting for everything to look exactly as you wish it would look, and everything to line up as you wish it would line up, then really you're doing yourself a disservice. Get out to market quickly. And if that means having a substandard website or web page because you haven't been able to afford the right person to help you, if it means that you haven't got the time or the capacity to do something like that, and you can only really put something online with a decent email address, as was said earlier, you can pick graphics for £20 from sort of online resources. So I think the important thing is starting to understand that there's no excuse and starting to interact immediately. I'm also often very a lot of people say, because I write newspaper columns and tell me about what they do and are hoping to sort of connect with the right journalist. And people always say, well, I need PR, I need to spend money on marketing. I don't think that PR necessarily makes sales. What it does is build awareness. So the other thing in terms of both sales and speaking to journalists and getting out there is, I was taught by my father to knock on doors. I still knock on doors. We've got a decent business. If you stick me in Google and I write you an email, enough things come up that you'd think, yes, I'll reply to her. But nonetheless, to this day, and even with a big sales team, I still effectively cold call. Occasionally via LinkedIn, I'll hunt someone out and I'll send them a message. I'd love to talk to you about what we're doing, and this is why. Very short, sometimes with an attachment. So the other thing, I think, is reticence to go out and talk about yourself. The US, in many ways, I think, leads on how people introduce themselves and how people deal with success and how people interact with third parties. When I recently went to Silicon Valley, this was in April, I had the opportunity to meet people like Sheryl Sandberg, and we had all these wonderful round tables with all these wonderful women. I was with 12 female tech entrepreneurs. And at the start of this trip, and I think there's a lesson for people here, all of the Americans introduced themselves, and effectively, all we all really heard was, I've saved small children, I've built an empire, I am a world leader, because their introductions were so strong. They put on the table their absolutely best foot forward and were not afraid to be punchy about what it was they've achieved, so you remember them. And the British entrepreneurs, we'd all done some pretty, decent, reasonably impressive things. I'd floated a company, everybody else had like 2 or 3 things on their CV that was arguably equally impressive. But most of us started the day by just introducing ourselves with our name and just saying I'm co-founder of, and maybe 1 or 2 sentences. By the end of the day, we'd all listened to enough Americans to realize what we're doing wrong. So we then reintroduce ourselves the next day and we sound like different people. And I think that that's really important also from some of the interactions I've had with people today and also yesterday speaking to people about businesses and people that tweeted me and written me messages on LinkedIn is don't be afraid to introduce yourself. You are an excellent example of how people should talk in a room. I always believe that you should ask a question, for example. There's an incredible number of people on all the panels here today that have interesting businesses and experience. If anybody in this room is thinking of starting a business, has services and products that you would like to interact, that you would like to sell to any of the people that are in this room, you should all be asking a question and introducing yourself the same way, because that's the fastest way for everybody in this room to get to know you. So I don't know what the tipping point is, but what I do know is that people are starting to be a bit more forthcoming and a bit less British is what I'm starting to find at home. So perhaps I don't want to encourage anyone to be a bit less Irish, lest I be thrown off stage by an entire room of Irish people. But I think being a bit less demure, being out there, and that involves being digital. Tweet a journalist. If you're doing something interesting and it launches tomorrow, tweet the person that writes the section of the local newspaper that you would really like to be included in, and be a little bit more forthcoming. And I think that's an important lesson. I think we've got time for one more question. Hi.
Hi, my name is Carl McRaymond. I run a video production company for businesses to promote their businesses through video production. And I'm wondering, how do you reckon the best way to promote a service rather than a product is?
Well, I presume that you've already made some videos that hopefully are pretty good and pretty tidy. Mm-hmm. So I think it's always a great idea to have an example of your product and what you've done. And if the videos that you've already made for other companies aren't videos that you think best represent you, find some friends, make a great video. Take your phone out, get some video footage of all of the speakers here today. Do something clever and intelligent that shows what you can do with a camera or even with your iPhone, because all of the FT content, for example, is filmed on an iPhone. And I mean, cold call. And also, I really believe in platforms like Twitter. My first few, this is like some time ago now, but some of my first press quotes, some of my best connections, they started from following interesting people and replying. And I mean, that's changed dramatically now, and I receive a lot of messages myself now. But get out there and talk to people. I'd also say this. I mean, speaking for myself, entrepreneurs often support entrepreneurs. When I get a message from someone that's well written and gives off a vibe of being someone who's really ambitious and really trying, I generally do my best to do some sort of, I believe in doing pay it forward and random acts of kindness every day. So I always try and find some way to connect people to something, because I really remember the days when I used to send tons of emails to people hoping for a reply. So I try and do that too. So be entrepreneurial. You know, write messages that are a little bit personal. Have a research of someone. You know, I arrived in the hotel I stayed at in Dublin. They'd obviously been stalking me because there were vegan donuts in my room and a collection of other things which are my weaknesses, which they could only have known about if they really stalked. So quite frankly, I thought it was very clever. Because you know what, I'll always stay there, and I'll remember that they did something that was personalised to me. So try and also be a little bit personal when you get in touch with people. I saw you did this last week. I read on your website that you're trying to use communications more. I saw your video online. I think we can do better. We're a young company. We're really competitive with our pricing. Would you give us an opportunity? Generally speaking, as I say, when we go for large companies, but also entrepreneurs are often very supportive of entrepreneurs. So good luck. I think that might be my time. Thank you for having me.